One of the things that you have to think about when you're working on a project is how are we going to actually build the project? And that means, who do I need to hire? When do I need to hire them? When does a contractor get involved? When do architects and engineers get involved? Just the whole process. And so there's a few different ways to go about that. And so I'm just going to go over that now and then also show you the way that I like to deliver projects or suggest for clients to work on projects because I found it to be so successful, with a huge caveat being when the team is a good team and a team that you actually can trust. So we'll get to that at the end. To start with, design, bid, build is something you may have heard about. And it's basically when you design and then you take basically a whole pile of drawings, a whole stack of drawings, and you have a contractor bid it, and they should be going out to their subs for different trades, whatever it is, they'll be getting numbers back from them, and then they give you a big number. They'll give that back to you. And then, usually you'll actually solicit, you should be soliciting like, B2, bid 2, bid 3, it's unintelligible, bid 3. What you're really looking for in these bids are, you're going to get some that are high, so multiple. You're going to get some that are, expensive, but maybe where you want it to be. And then you're going to get some that might be low. And the thing that is important to realize is that this is a red flag and this is a red flag. And you sort of want to be in the sweet spot here where you're actually getting something that meets your budget and, is a contractor who's got the right qualifications. It meets your budget. They have history working on projects of this type, that kind of thing. And the thing about this way of working is that if we look at this as a timeline, this takes time, this takes time. Sorry, I'll shorten that. The design process takes time, the bidding process takes time. And then eventually, most likely there's going to be like a revision cycle that needs to happen because by the time you're getting your numbers in, it probably is going to be higher than what you wanted it to be. And so there's this revision cycle, which sort of takes you back a little bit. And certainly, you can check price back along the way. But, eventually when you're happy with sort of where you're at with the numbers and the documents, you can move forward into building. And, that's fine. I think that in some projects, that's fine and it's probably appropriate. But in terms of the projects I work on, I find it to be very cumbersome. And in particular, because of this, where by delaying the cost, figuring out even the ballpark you're playing in, delaying that a bit, you're sort of like wasting time in the beginning in the design phase. And so that's why a big part of the processes I prefer, which are design build, part of it is trying to like ballpark price at the very beginning. Another way of working is time and materials, or you might call it T&M. And this often is something where it's an add-on to a project. Like for instance, say you made a change to your project, and so you need 50 of these things installed, but it wasn't in the original bid, and so the contractor effectively tells you, it's going to be that for the material itself, and then it's going to be whatever for the time, and that just gets added up. And that creates your T&M, or your time and materials. This can be done for bigger projects. And so, for instance, I know contractors and developers in major cities where when you're working on a complicated project, you often can't document it in the same way that you would in a sort of linear fashion of design, bid, build. As you crack the egg open, you sort of discover what's inside of it. And it's like, ooh, that might be, maybe it's not what you thought it would be, And so what do? Do you go back, do you cycle back to the beginning, or do you keep going in a time and materials fashion? And the answer, I think, again, trust is always the key here. That's the underpinning of any sort of relationship in general, but especially in construction, is that you can move forward in T&M. And I've seen very large projects where this is the case. So, for instance, some very specific examples. I know some of the contractors who work on places like Fenway Park, places like Mass General Hospital. These are massive buildings, massive institutions that have very strict timelines. For instance, if you're going to be doing something at Fenway Park, there isn't a lot of time to be, overly documenting something before you actually crack that egg open and get going. And again, it's of course a balance. I'm not saying to go into things blind and you can pre-order as much as you can and, front load and prefab and blah, blah, blah. That's all fine. I'm not saying that. But in reality, and what a lot of these contractors have told me is that what they end up telling their client is, hey, if you want me to do this and you want me to do this fast, we have to move forward in a time and materials fashion, because it's just going to take too much time to, again, go all the way back here and then bid it and then do this and then, then build it. And again, so design, bid, build, that takes too much time. And, the trust thing is key here, because a lot of owners want a GMP, a guaranteed max price. Like what is the maximum I'm going to pay for this? It sounds nice, but in a lot of cases, what does it lead to? If you had to guess, if you had to bid on something and someone said, look, I need your max number, guess what you're going to do? You're going to come up with your number, and then you're probably going to raise it a bit, right? Because, you don't want for like the uncertainty to come back and bite you. Um, you don't want to get bit. And so that's where a GMP can be really difficult. And that's where these other ways of delivering projects, I think, have a lot of possibility. And again, the huge caveat is that there has to be like significant trust here, which is always the case, even when people say it's open book. You can cook books. We've seen so many examples of this. It's not that hard to just show someone something that looks better than it is, right? Like, who knows what the truth is that you're actually seeing. So, that's where checking references, checking things like, in A305, which is basically just like a sort of a under the hood view of a contractor, how much money they did worked on last year on projects, what's their legal history? Are they being sued? How long have they been in business as that name? Fly by night contractors, it sort of exposes them, or at least gives you as the owner a way to say, hey, like, what's this about? Like, or why is that? And so there are different ways we can protect you as the owner. But so, starting with the sort of traditional design, bid, build, about as linear-ish. But again, it still relies on iteration, because as soon as the numbers, start coming into reality, it's like not great. And so another way to do that is this one that we were just looking at, which is time and materials, which is really just adding up all the different stuff, adding up all the different, how much time did it take to do X, Y, and Z, and then putting it all together and, probably applying a certain, overhead and profit to it. And that becomes your number. When you're sort of flying by the seat of your pants, sorry, like rolling along, that can be a good way to go. Sometimes it's the only way to go, frankly, because design, bid, build takes too long. And, again, this is where there's no prescribed way to do this, because even in a project where you've taken the time to document it super well, made some giant document stack, bid it out, finally got it to a number you can take, there will be changes. There just are. Especially for renovations or working in cities, places like that, where there's just a lot of history, a lot of things you uncover. You dig a hole in the ground, even if you've got soils reports, you might find something crazy. It just happens, and it happens more often than not. And so I think that should be the expectation. And so my feeling is, if you can follow a design, build model, it has the potential, and again, the caveat being trust. We'll just write that up here. We're in the trust tree. A little tree here. We have to be in the trust tree. Gosh, that's an awful tree. We have to be in the trust tree because there's just too much at stake. It's these projects are a part of your soul in a lot of ways. They're dreams. They're a ton of money, right? A ton of time, a ton of investment in every way, emotionally, financially, for your future, for your family. I mean, it's we are playing with high stakes here, right? And so that's why I think it's so important to get a lot of this right. So, assuming that we're starting with trust as the starting point, the design build as I have executed it and have grown to love is the owner, and I'll just use myself, my studio, working together to iterate quickly through designs to get to a concept that we are happy with. And this concept is not overly developed. It should look like the building if you squint your eyes in the future, but it's a rough draft. And most importantly, though, is that it is enough to actually get pricing. So this is where I always recommend introducing contractors. And it can be, pre-construction. And they can do a lot of different things. They can help you with pricing. What they're doing is they are helping you establish the sort of ballpark that we're playing in here so that we can make changes if we need to earlier in the process. Because once you get to documentation, and I've said this a lot in videos, the goal should be, less time. We should have a vision of the goal for the project that, this draft that all these other people who get involved can all rally around. And that's what the whole point of the concept is. And usually we will develop that a bit into, a schematic design, which is really just a bit more detail. Once we have sort of worked through, sort of like, often it's like 3 to 5, goes down to like, 2, goes down to like 1, and then maybe like a 1B or something. And that's the concept. That's how we work it down. We work it down. We just sort of work through your goals. Again, we're starting with first principles, goals, desires, requirements, ambitions, how you want it to run, what are the bits and pieces, all this stuff. Because once you get to the documentation, and then eventually once you get into the construction, time is running and like the amount of money being spent goes from, call it like up to this, it might be, like 1 or 2% of a project, like at most even. It very, very quickly just goes up to like 6 figures. And then from there, it goes up again once you start doing the actual construction to probably 7 figures. So we're talking about like a huge amount of expenditure, and that's why, to me, that's why, I mean, just to use the old adage, it's like, time is money, right? You're burning cash. You are just burning cash, and you need to get this thing open as fast as you can to start bringing money back in the door. And so that's why, in my experience, design build can be such an effective way to go about this, because what you're really doing is you are trying to find a contractor early in the process, so before you're even really getting into the construction, to help you define what this is, define what the budget is. And that's what they are doing with you at the very beginning of projects. And this is why I'm such a big fan of it, is because it can help save time for everybody. You as the owner, me as the person helping you with the concept. And the contractor doesn't have to sort of deliver the bad news, here, where it's like, uh-oh, what do we do now? The budget is, 2x, 3x, who knows? What do you do? Big decisions have to be made. Do we lower the square footage? Do we, somehow try to save money on finishes or whatever? But it's like, this is a problem, and this is very common. And so this sticker shock First of all, I am a big believer that you people like me who know what they're doing should be able to guide you away from sticker shock, or should be able to say, hey, what you're asking for is going to be expensive, but that's a different conversation. This sticker shock, should it happen, has to happen earlier, because otherwise you're just delaying the whole thing. I mean, you might even have a contractor who's telling you, hey, like I'm ready to get going and like build this thing, but you can't afford it. So, all right, I guess you're off my schedule. I guess we won't go in for permit. I guess we have to make, significant changes to the DNA of the project. And if you're going to have to do that, my feeling is just to do it as early as you can. This is when changes are made. You know, that's when it has to happen, because otherwise you're just adding time, time plus, plus, plus. And these are already difficult enough projects. So by having someone who can come in and do pre-construction work with you or help you with pricing, when you have a document set that can be very lightweight, but it shows enough of the DNA of the project to help them understand the scope of the project, meaning, you're not telling them every last detail, but a good contractor can fill in the dots. They can say, okay, like I see you're making a metal building here or whatever it is. And okay, like here's some examples of things we're thinking about. That contractor should be the right fit for your project, as we've talked about in other videos. If they're not the right fit, they might not be able to make this jump with you, but a good contractor will, I guarantee it. And if anybody says they can't, they're just go somewhere else, because there are plenty of people, this has worked for decades, that have no problem. I mean, most people can even do it with, help you to some degree with less. You're looking for a teammate here. You're looking for someone who is looking for solutions, not problems that create change orders for them. So if you can find someone who is on the same team, who is willing to basically help you guide the project along as a teammate, that can be great. And some of the sort of particulars of it, GCs very often, they often don't have architects. So like, how do they structure the architecture and engineering team? That's always a question. Is it in-house or out of house? Sort of doesn't matter for you, because a big part of what we're doing here is tying them together. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean, tie them together in the sense that there's no more finger pointing, because guess what? They're on the same team, and they might finger point a bit, but the sort of dichotomy of like architect and builder not agreeing on things, like we get rid of that, because by having the architecture and engineering and contracting under one roof, it can just really help everybody be on the same page, because they're literally playing for the same team, whether or not they're two offices that have some sort of a joint venture going or whatever. You're avoiding this situation where you've got your architect and your GC. Everybody's upset with each other. So by pinning them together, it can really speed things up, and it can really accelerate projects, so less time, which is sort of the goal for most owners that I know. And so this is all just a way to look at the design build process as a way to get answers faster, find contractors who have the right attitude, solution-oriented attitude. They have to be, and when you find them, they're going to be saying things like, oh, this is a cool project, or yeah, like we'll figure that out. That's not a big deal. Or, when you ask them questions, they should have answers. Not saying, ooh, yeah, I don't know about that. And even if there is a big version of that, but we'll figure it out, because that is the answer. And, you should be able to figure this out pretty quickly when you sort of know what you're looking for. And that's, I think, a big part of it is that owners may not even know what they're looking for. Even experienced owners may not have done projects this way. But I can say, if it's possible, this is a great way to go, because the biggest thing that you're really doing is you're really, taking a lot of the time out of the documentation, and you're taking away this big sticker shock, which is, those are the things that take a ton of time and add time when you have this big sticker shock on a project. And so let's get everybody in the pool together earlier, build the team, have everybody pulling in the right direction. And the only caveat to that, I would say, is it just has to happen. You have to have something to show them. And that's why, again, my focus is on the concept and the schematic design with clients, because everything else after that, in my experience, can roll pretty quickly when you have the right team, because so much of like the questions and the excitement about coming up with things is happening in this early stage. So that's the way that I look at this process. That's why I like design build. It's something I've seen very recently working really well with clients. It just always has worked well when it's a good team. That's why I'm both an architect and a contractor, because I believe in it enough where I'm actually, paying for the insurance for both, have both registrations and licenses. And so I think it's something that I'm really trying to, sort of walk the walk in that way, because I'm just such a believer that it solves so many of the problems within the industry of doing something in like a true design, bid, build, go back, fix it, do it again, do it. It's just like time, 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 time. No, thank you. My interest is in building buildings that work for you on your budget and on your timeline. So if this is helpful for you, please like and subscribe, because that's a great way for me to see what people are sort of really interacting with. And I appreciate that. So thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.